What happens when one of America's most brilliant tech innovators gets forced to the back of a plane? And what makes a pilot, a man with decades of command experience, beg for forgiveness just hours later? Today I'm going to tell you about Derrick Caldwell. 10 years ago, they called him the Black Elon of Silicon Valley. His AI predictive software revolutionized an entire industry. He flew private jets, closed million-dollar deals with a handshake, built an empire from nothing. But on one November evening at Dallas, Fort Worth International, none of that mattered. "Sir, I'm afraid you've been reassigned to a different seat." Those words, spoken by a gate agent who couldn't meet his eyes, would trigger a chain reaction that exposed the raw nerve of American racism hiding beneath the polished veneer of corporate travel. By midnight, Captain Theodore Doyle, a white pilot with 3 decades of flying experience, would sit across from Derrick in an executive lounge, hands trembling around a paper cup of coffee, literally begging, "Mr. Caldwell, I misjudged. For that, I beg forgiveness." But here's where this story takes a turn that nobody saw coming. This isn't about a seat on a plane. This is about power. Who has it? Who doesn't? And what happens when someone who's been systematically pushed to the back their entire life finally pushes back? If you've ever been made to feel less than because of who you are, your skin color, your accent, your name, hit that subscribe button right now. Because this channel exists to expose these moments of truth. The moments when masks slip. When the polite fiction of equality crashes into the hard reality of bias. Have you ever watched someone with authority treat you differently than the person standing next to you? That feeling in your gut that something's wrong but you can't quite prove it? That's exactly what Derrick felt standing at that gate. We're talking about a man who revolutionized artificial intelligence. A black man who broke through every barrier Silicon Valley threw at him. A man who should have been untouchable. But in that moment he was just another black passenger being told to move to the back. What happened next reveals everything about how power works in America. And if you stay with me until the end, you'll discover the one phone call that changed everything, not just for Derrick but potentially for thousands of travelers who look like him. Let me take you inside Dallas, Fort Worth International on the busiest travel weekend of the year, Thanksgiving. The terminal buzzed with that unique airport energy. Parents wrestling with overstuffed carry-ons, business travelers hunched over laptops, the smell of overpriced coffee and cinnamon pretzels hanging in the air. Derrick Caldwell stood out even in the crowd. 6'2", wearing a tailored navy suit that had survived hours of flight delays. His presence carried the quiet confidence of someone who'd spent a decade being the only black face in rooms full of venture capitalists. He usually flew private. Gulfstream. Citation. Whatever worked. But tonight was different. The board of his company, after a brutal takeover, had voted him out. He'd spent the last year rebuilding under a new venture. Travel budgets were tight. So there he was, one of the most brilliant minds in technology, stuck on a last-minute commercial ticket to New York. Flight 2375 to New York, now boarding. Derrick stepped forward, boarding pass in hand. First-class priority boarding. The kind of ticket that costs 4 figures and comes with warm towels and real glassware. But before he reached the scanner, something shifted. The gate agent's professional smile faltered. Another agent leaned over, glancing at Derrick's ticket. Their whispered conversation carried an edge of unease. "Sir, I'm afraid you've been reassigned to a different seat." Derrick's expression didn't change, but something inside him did. "Excuse me? I paid for Comfort Plus. I need to stretch out. I've got 3 back-to-back meetings as soon as I land." The agent avoided his eyes. "There was an issue. Just head back to row 31, middle seat. It's all we can do right now." "Middle seat? Look, I don't mean to cause a scene, but I'm a priority passenger." That's when Captain Theodore Doyle stepped in. Silver hair under his cap. 4 gold stripes on his sleeve. His badge gleamed under the fluorescent airport lights. His voice dripped with something sharper than authority, contempt masked as condescension. "You heard the agent, sir. Take the seat you're given or don't fly at all. Plane's already late." If you're watching this and thinking, maybe there was a legitimate reason for the seat change, let me stop you right there. Because what Derrick saw in Captain Doyle's eyes wasn't policy enforcement. It was a look he'd seen 1,000 times before. In investors' offices when he first pitched his company, at high-end restaurants when he asked for the check, at tech conferences when he wore a hoodie instead of a blazer. It was the look that said, "You don't belong here. Not in the front rows. Not in first-class comfort. You belong in the back." Now, I want you to really feel what Derrick felt in that moment. The humiliation burning in his chest. The eyes of other passengers on his back. The calculation every black person in America learns to make. Fight this and risk escalation? Or swallow it and keep moving? Because fights at airport gates almost always end the same way, with security called and black men in handcuffs. So Derrick smiled. A controlled, icy smile that never reached his eyes. No problem. I'll take what you're giving me. But as he walked down the jet bridge, that same humiliation ignited something else. An idea. Because unlike most passengers forced to the back of the plane, Derrick Caldwell had contacts. Friends. Quiet strings he could pull even without owning a jet. Have you ever been in a situation where you had to swallow your pride just to get through the day? Where you knew you were being treated unfairly, but fighting back seemed more dangerous than giving in? That's the reality millions of Americans face every single day. Not just on planes but in classrooms, in stores, in job interviews, in traffic stops. But what if, just once, the tables turned? What if the person being pushed aside had the power to push back? If you want to find out exactly how Derrick turned this humiliation into one of the most satisfying moments of justice you'll ever hear about, hit that like button right now and comment "justice" below. The algorithm loves engagement, and I promise the story delivers a payoff worth every second of your time. Row 31 was exactly what you'd expect. Middle seat. No legroom. Wedged between a college kid blasting music into leaky headphones and an older woman who kept stealing armrest space. For a man who once had an entire corner of Silicon Valley whispering his name, it was more than uncomfortable. It was a message. But Derrick had a message of his own. And it started with a single text to a number very few people on Earth had the privilege to contact directly. Brandon Ellison, Chief Operating Officer of Horizon Airlines. Before we continue with what happened on that flight, you need to understand who Derrick Caldwell really is. Because context matters. History matters. And Derrick's journey to that airport gate tells us everything about why what happened next was so powerful. 38 years old. Born in Oakland to a high school math teacher and a postal worker. Graduated top of his class from Stanford with dual degrees in computer science and economics. The kind of resume that should open every door in Silicon Valley. But for Derrick, those doors didn't just swing open. He had to kick them down. In 2011, Derrick walked into his first venture capital meeting with a revolutionary idea. Predictive AI that could forecast consumer behavior with 87% accuracy. The kind of technology that makes tech executives salivate. He'd prepared for months. Perfected his pitch. Brought working prototypes. But instead of questions about his algorithm, he got questions about his qualifications. Instead of excitement about his technology, he got concerns about his fit with their portfolio. One investor actually asked if he was the technical guy or the diversity hire. Derrick left without funding. But he didn't leave defeated. This is where most stories would tell you about Derrick's perseverance, or how he overcame obstacles. But let's be real with each other. What Derrick faced wasn't just obstacles. It was systematic exclusion. It was racism dressed up in business casual. And what he did next wasn't just perseverance. It was revolutionary. Derrick bootstrapped his company from a one-bedroom apartment in East Palo Alto. Coded 18 hours a day. Lived on ramen and coffee. Hired 2 other brilliant black engineers who'd been overlooked by the big tech firms. They called their company Prism Analytics. And within 8 months they'd built what the venture capitalists had rejected, only better. Their first client? A mid-sized retail chain looking to predict inventory needs. Prism's algorithm outperformed every competitor. Then came a streaming service. Then a healthcare provider. Then a major bank. By 2014, the same venture capitalists who'd shown him the door were blowing up his phone. But Derrick wasn't answering. How many of you watching right now have been underestimated? Overlooked? Passed over for opportunities you knew you deserved? That feeling, that burn in your chest when someone dismisses your potential based on how you look, that's what fueled Derrick's rise. We're talking about a man who didn't just succeed despite the system. He built something so undeniable that the system had to come to him. And if you're still with me watching this story unfold, hit that subscribe button right now. Because this channel is dedicated to these moments, when people who've been pushed aside push back and change everything. By 2016, they were calling him the Black Elon in tech magazines. Prism Analytics had grown to 200 employees. Their headquarters in Oakland, not Palo Alto, not Mountain View, but Oakland, became a beacon for black and brown tech talent. Derrick made it a point to hire from HBCUs, to mentor young engineers from underrepresented communities, to create the pipeline that Silicon Valley claimed didn't exist. And the money followed. Prism went public in 2018 with a valuation of $2.8 billion. Derrick Caldwell became one of the few black tech billionaires in America. Private jets. Mansion in the Oakland Hills. Vacation home in Martha's Vineyard. The American dream realized. But success at that level comes with its own dangers. In early 2022, Derrick began noticing shifts in his board meetings. New faces. New investors. New strategic directions being proposed. Prism had become too valuable to remain under black leadership. At least that's how the venture capital world saw it. A consortium of investors began quietly accumulating shares, making backroom deals, positioning their people. The takeover was methodical, professional, and absolutely ruthless. By March 2023, Derrick Caldwell, the founder, the visionary, the heart of Prism Analytics, was voted out of his own company by a board that now consisted primarily of white men from the same venture capital firms that had rejected him years earlier. Let that sink in for a moment. The man built a billion-dollar company from nothing, revolutionized an entire industry, created hundreds of high-paying jobs, and they still found a way to take it from him. If you think racism only happens in explicit slurs and obvious discrimination, this is your wake-up call. Sometimes it wears custom suits and speaks in MBA jargon about leadership transitions and strategic realignments. Derrick walked away with his millions, but he lost his creation. The company he'd built with 18-hour days and pure determination. The vision he'd fought for when no one believed in him. For 3 months he disappeared from public view. No interviews. No social media. No tech conferences. But Derrick Caldwell wasn't finished. Not by a long shot. In July 2023 he emerged with a new venture, Nexus Intelligence. A smaller team, a focused mission, and a determination to rebuild, not just a company but a legacy that couldn't be stolen. Nexus started lean. No venture capital. No outside investors. Just Derrick, his savings, and a core team of loyalists who'd followed him from Prism. They worked out of a converted warehouse in Oakland. Back to basics. Back to the hunger that had driven them in the beginning. By November 2023, the month of our story, Nexus had secured its first major clients. The company wasn't profitable yet, but it was showing promise. Derrick was flying commercial again. Watching expenses. Building methodically. Which brings us back to Dallas, Fort Worth International on that fateful November evening. When was the last time you had to start over? When everything you built was taken away and you had to find the strength to begin again. That crushing weight of loss, followed by the slow burn of determination. That's where Derrick was when he stepped up to that boarding gate. We're witnessing a man who had already fought harder than most people will in a lifetime, now facing yet another barrier placed in his path. And if you want to understand why what happened next matters so much, comment rebuild below. Let me know you're tracking with this story because the turning point is coming. So now you understand, when Captain Doyle looked at Derrick Caldwell and said, "Take the seat you're given or don't fly at all," he wasn't just talking to any passenger. He was talking to a man who had been told no his entire career and built empires anyway. A man who had been pushed aside by the system and came back stronger. A man who knew exactly what that look in Doyle's eyes meant, because he'd seen it in boardrooms and venture capital offices across Silicon Valley. And most importantly, a man who still had connections. Powerful ones. As Derrick made his way to row 31 middle seat, he pulled out his phone. The Wi-Fi hadn't even loaded fully before he scrolled to a contact that very few people on Earth had the privilege to call directly. Brandon Ellison, Chief Operating Officer of Horizon Airlines. Not just a high-ranking executive but a Stanford classmate. One of the few allies who had never doubted Derrick's brilliance. A friend who understood exactly what Derrick had faced to reach the heights he had. Derrick typed a simple text. Flying Horizon. Row 31. Discrimination situation. Need you on deck. The response came almost immediately, "Call me the second you land." Now, I want you to remember something crucial about this moment. Derrick Caldwell didn't have to accept being moved to the back of the plane. He could have made a scene. Could have demanded his rights. Could have escalated. But he also knew what happens to black men who cause problems in airports. He'd seen those viral videos. The security officers. The handcuffs. The perp walks through terminals. So he made a strategic choice. He took the middle seat in row 31. But he didn't take the disrespect. Let's rewind and zoom in on exactly what happened at that gate. Because the details matter. The subtle shifts in body language. The choice of words. The power dynamics at play. It was 6:42 p.m. when Flight 2375 to New York began boarding. The screen above the gate flickered with the familiar zones. First class, priority, zones 1 through 5. Derrick Caldwell stood in the priority lane. His boarding pass, purchased just 3 hours earlier at a premium price, Clearly showed seat 3A. Window seat. Comfort Plus. Extra legroom for his 6 feet 2 inches frame. He wore AirPods, half listening to a podcast about quantum computing. His mind was already in New York, mentally preparing for the meetings that would determine Nexus Intelligence's future. When the gate agent called for priority boarding, Derrick stepped forward with the practiced ease of someone who'd flown hundreds of thousands of miles. Suit jacket unbuttoned. Carry-on rolling smoothly behind him. Boarding pass displayed on his phone. The first gate agent, let's call her Melissa, scanned his pass. Standard procedure. But then something changed. Her eyes flicked to her screen, then to Derrick, then back to the screen. She leaned over to her colleague, let's call him Robert, and whispered something. Robert glanced at Derrick, then nodded slightly. Melissa cleared her throat. Sir, I'm afraid there's been a change to your seat assignment. Derrick removed one AirPod. I'm sorry? You've been reassigned to a different seat. Her voice was professional but tight. She wouldn't meet his eyes. Derrick's expression remained neutral, but his mind raced. Seat changes happen. Planes get swapped. Equipment issues arise. But something in her demeanor suggested this wasn't routine. May I ask why? I specifically booked Comfort Plus for this flight. I have meetings immediately after landing. Robert stepped in. The flight is full, sir. We had to make some adjustments. Derrick noticed something crucial. Neither agent offered an explanation for why he was the one being moved. No mention of mechanical issues. No reference to balancing the aircraft weight. Just vague adjustments. I understand flights get full, Derrick said, keeping his voice measured. But I paid for a premium seat. If there's an issue, I should be offered an equivalent or better seat, not downgraded. That's when he noticed something over Robert's shoulder. A white couple in their 60s being processed at the adjacent counter. The woman pointing toward the front of the plane. The man nodding with satisfaction. I want you to pay close attention to what happens next. Because this is where the mask slips. This is where policy becomes pretext. Captain Theodore Doyle had been standing near the gate, reviewing flight plans on his tablet. At 58, with salt and pepper hair and the confident posture of someone used to commanding rooms, he cut an imposing figure in his pilot's uniform. He looked up at the minor commotion, assessed the situation in seconds, and made a decision to intervene. He didn't need to. Gate agents handle seating issues every day. The situation wasn't escalating. Derrick wasn't raising his voice or making demands. But Captain Doyle stepped forward anyway. You heard the agent, sir. Take the seat you're given or don't fly at all. Plane's already late. Notice the false choice. Notice the immediate escalation. Notice how quickly accommodation became ultimatum. Derrick certainly noticed. He'd navigated enough hostile boardrooms to recognize a power play when he saw one. The captain's tone carried something beyond authority, a dismissiveness, a subtle contempt. The kind that says, I'm in charge here and you're not worth the delay. Have you ever had that moment when someone speaks to you and instantly you know, they've already decided who you are without knowing a thing about you? That split second when you realize you're not being seen as an individual, but as a category, a stereotype, a problem to be managed. That's what Derrick felt in that moment. And I guarantee many of you watching have felt it too. We're witnessing a textbook example of how bias operates in real time. Not with slurs or explicit hatred, but with assumptions, with tone, with the benefit of the doubt withheld. If you've experienced this, that moment when you realize you're being treated differently, drop 100 points in the comments. Let's see how many of us share this reality. The gate area had grown quiet. Other passengers watched the interaction with that uncomfortable mixture of curiosity and avoidance. No one intervened. No one questioned. Derrick had a choice to make. And he had to make it quickly. Option 1, escalate. Demand to speak to a supervisor. Point out the discriminatory treatment. Exercise his rights as a paying customer. But he knew the risks. He'd seen how quickly situations like this turned against black men. How assertive became aggressive. How questioning became disruptive. How quickly gate agents called security. How those encounters ended with missed flights at best, handcuffs at worst. Option 2, accept the humiliation. Take the downgrade. Swallow the disrespect. Get to New York. Make the meetings. Secure the future of Nexus Intelligence. Live to fight another day. Derrick Caldwell, tech visionary, former billionaire, Stanford graduate, made the calculation that countless black Americans make every day. Is this particular injustice worth the risk of escalation? He smiled. That tight, controlled smile that never reached his eyes. No problem. I'll take what you're giving me. Captain Doyle nodded curtly and turned away, mission accomplished. The gate agents avoided eye contact as they handed Derrick his new boarding pass. Row 31, seat B, middle seat. Economy. No extra legroom. As Derrick walked down the jet bridge, he felt the familiar weight of it all. The constant calculations. The energy expended navigating these moments. The emotional labor of managing other people's biases while maintaining your own dignity. But this time something was different. This time he had leverage. As Derrick made his way through first class toward the back of the plane, he noticed something that confirmed his suspicions. The white couple from the gate, the ones who had been speaking with the other agent, were settling into row 3. The woman arranging her belongings in seat 3A. His original seat. It wasn't an equipment issue. It wasn't weight balancing. It wasn't an air marshal needing placement. It was a choice. A decision that he, despite his ticket, despite his status, was less deserving of that seat than they were. Let me be absolutely clear about something. This isn't about a seat on a plane. This is about who is seen as belonging in certain spaces. Who is given the benefit of the doubt. Who is accommodated and who is inconvenienced. This is about the 1,000 little decisions made every day that reinforce who matters and who doesn't. And if you think I'm reading too much into a simple seat reassignment, I need you to ask yourself, why was Derrick Caldwell, with his paid premium ticket, the one moved to the back? Why did Captain Doyle feel the need to intervene in what should have been a routine customer service interaction? Why was there no explanation, no compensation offered, no apology given? Row 31 was exactly what you'd expect. Middle seat. No legroom. Wedged between a college kid with leaky headphones and an older woman who immediately claimed both armrests. For a man who stood 6 feet 2 inches, who had back issues from years hunched over computers, who needed to be sharp for meetings that would determine his company's future, it was more than uncomfortable. It was physically painful. But as Derrick settled in, something shifted in his expression. A hardness entered his eyes. A determination. Because unlike most passengers forced to the back of the plane, Derrick Caldwell had options. What would you do if you were in Derrick's position? Would you accept the disrespect and move on? Would you make a scene and risk escalation? Or would you find another way to address the injustice? What if you had connections that most passengers don't? What if you could make one phone call that would change everything? As the plane began its final boarding process, Derrick pulled out his phone. The cabin Wi-Fi hadn't even connected fully before he scrolled to a contact that very few people had direct access to. Brandon Ellison, Chief Operating Officer of Horizon Airlines. Not just any executive. A Stanford classmate. A friend who understood exactly what Derrick had faced to reach the heights he had. One of the few allies who had never doubted Derrick's brilliance. Derrick typed a simple text. Flying Horizon. Row 31. Discrimination situation. Need you on deck. The response came almost immediately. Call me the second you land. How many times have you witnessed injustice and wished you could do something about it? Wished you had the power to make it right? Most of us have to swallow these moments. We complain to friends later. We leave bad reviews. We vow never to use that service again. But what happens when someone who's been systematically pushed aside actually has the power to push back? We're about to find out. And if you want to see exactly how this power dynamic gets flipped, make sure you've hit that subscribe button and turned on notifications. Because the next part of this story is something you don't want to miss. As the flight attendants performed their final checks, Derrick slipped his phone into airplane mode. The seatbelt sign illuminated with a soft ding. The familiar rumble of engines filled the cabin. But something else was happening too. Something Derrick couldn't see from row 31. Passengers had noticed. The whispers had started. A woman in row 15 had recognized him from a Forbes cover story. A tech bro in row 22 had interned at Prism Analytics. A college student 3 rows back was literally taking his entrepreneurship course on Masterclass. Phones tilted discreetly. Social media posts drafted. The digital whispers spreading faster than the plane could taxi. Just saw Derrick Caldwell, the Derrick Caldwell, get forced into a middle seat in economy while some random couple took his premium seat. At Horizon Air, what's going on? Black tech founder worth millions getting pushed to the back of the plane in 2023. Some things never change. Hashtag flying while black. Sitting 3 rows behind Derrick Caldwell, who just got seat swapped to the back. Captain was rude AF about it. Anyone else on hashtag flight 2375 see this? By the time the plane lifted off the runway, Derrick's humiliation was already going viral. But he didn't know that yet. Sitting in row 31, knees pressed against the seat in front of him, he was focused on something else entirely. What exactly would happen when this plane landed in New York? As Flight 2375 climbed to cruising altitude, Captain Theodore Doyle settled into the familiar rhythm of piloting. He made his standard welcome announcement, voice confident and reassuring. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is Captain Doyle speaking. We've reached our cruising altitude of 36,000 feet. Weather in New York looks clear and we expect an on-time arrival. Sit back, relax, and enjoy the flight." What Captain Doyle couldn't know, was that this routine flight was about to become the most consequential of his 30-year career. And that by the time this plane touched down at LaGuardia, the power dynamic he'd so casually enforced at the gate would be completely, irrevocably reversed. The Boeing 737 leveled at cruising altitude, the seatbelt sign dinged off, and Derrick Caldwell found himself in a physical manifestation of the discrimination he'd fought his entire career. Row 31. Middle seat. His knees pressed against the seat in front of him. His shoulders squeezed between two strangers. No room to open his laptop. No space to review his presentation for tomorrow's meetings. To his left, a college student, headphones leaking the tinny beat of hip-hop, completely oblivious to who he was sitting next to. To his right, an older woman who had claimed both armrests within seconds of sitting down. For most passengers, this would be merely uncomfortable. For Derrick, 6 feet 2 inches with chronic back pain from years of coding marathons, it was actively painful. But the physical discomfort paled compared to the humiliation. Every time a flight attendant passed with the beverage cart, every time he had to squeeze into the aisle to let someone use the bathroom, every time he shifted to find a position that didn't send shooting pain through his lower back, he remembered standing at that gate with his premium boarding pass. Remembered Captain Doyle's dismissive tone, "Take the seat you're given or don't fly at all." Remembered watching that older white couple settle into row 3, into his seat, without question or challenge. This is what discrimination feels like in real time. Not just the initial incident but the extended experience of it. The physical discomfort. The mental replay. The constant awareness of being treated as less than. And for the next 2 hours and 47 minutes, Derrick Caldwell, tech visionary, former billionaire, Stanford graduate, sat in that middle seat, feeling every minute of it. About 40 minutes into the flight, something unexpected happened. A flight attendant, mid-30s, black woman, name tag reading Tasha, paused at row 31 during the beverage service. She leaned down slightly, voice lowered. "Mr. Caldwell? I just wanted to say I'm a huge fan of your work. What happened at boarding, that wasn't right." Derrick looked up, surprised. "Thank you. I appreciate that. I've seen this before," she continued, keeping her voice down. "More than I'd like to admit. If you need anything during this flight, just ask for me specifically." Before Derrick could respond, she moved on with the cart, maintaining her professional demeanor. But that brief moment of recognition, of solidarity, shifted something in Derrick's experience. He wasn't alone in seeing what had happened. He wasn't imagining the discrimination. Others had witnessed it too. What Derrick couldn't see from row 31 was how many passengers had actually recognized him. How many had witnessed the incident at the gate. How many were now discussing it in hushed tones throughout the cabin. In row 15, a marketing executive who'd attended Derrick's keynote at South by Southwest last year was texting her colleague, "You won't believe who's on my flight and what just happened to him." In row 22, a young software engineer who'd interned at Prism Analytics was drafting a LinkedIn post about witnessing his former CEO's mistreatment. In row 27, a tech journalist was already reaching out to his editor about a potential story. The whispers spread through the cabin like ripples in still water. Phones tilted discreetly. Social media drafts saved for posting upon landing. Have you ever witnessed someone being mistreated and felt that knot in your stomach? That mixture of discomfort and uncertainty about whether to speak up? That's what dozens of passengers on Flight 2375 were feeling as they watched one of tech's most brilliant innovators squeezed into a middle seat at the back of the plane. We're seeing a moment when individual witnesses become a collective force. When private injustice becomes public accountability. And if you want to understand how quickly this situation is about to escalate, drop a eyes in the comments. Because what's happening at 36,000 feet is just the beginning. An hour into the flight, Derrick finally managed to connect to the in-flight Wi-Fi. He paid the $19.99 for premium access, another small indignity after being downgraded from his original seat. His phone immediately lit up with notifications. Emails, texts, social media alerts. But one message stood out from the rest. From Brandon Ellison, COO of Horizon Airlines. "Just got word about what happened. Already looking into it. Do not leave the airport when you land. I'll have someone meet your flight. Derrick's expression remained neutral, but something shifted in his posture. Attention released. A certainty settled in. For the first time since boarding, he allowed himself a small, genuine smile. What would it feel like to know that justice was already in motion? To know that the people who humiliated you would soon face consequences? To know that the power dynamic was about to flip completely? How would you spend those final hours of the flight, knowing what was waiting at the other end? Derrick spent the remainder of the flight in a state of focused calm. He couldn't work on his presentation, couldn't stretch his legs, couldn't even use the bathroom without disturbing both of his seatmates. So instead, he closed his eyes and planned what he would say when the plane landed, planned how he would handle the media if this went public, planned how this moment could become more than personal vindication, how it could create actual change. Because Derrick Caldwell hadn't built a tech empire by thinking small. He hadn't overcome systematic barriers by settling for individual victories. He thought in systems, in patterns, in structural changes. And as uncomfortable as Row 31 was, it had given him something valuable. Time to think about how this incident could become a catalyst. Meanwhile, in the cockpit, Captain Theodore Doyle was having an uneventful flight. Clear skies, good tailwind, on schedule for an on-time arrival at LaGuardia. He'd already forgotten about the minor incident at the gate. Just another entitled passenger who needed to be put in his place. Just another day maintaining order and keeping the flight on schedule. In his 30 years of flying, he'd made thousands of decisions just like it. Enforced policies. Backed up his gate agents. Maintained his authority. Never once had those routine decisions come back to haunt him. Today would be different. As the flight progressed, something remarkable was happening throughout the cabin. The whispers had become conversations. The individual witnesses had become a collective. Passengers who had never met were leaning across aisles, sharing what they'd seen at the gate. Comparing notes. Confirming details. Did you see how they just moved him without explanation? The captain didn't need to step in like that. The guy wasn't even causing a scene. I've been following his career for years. That's Derrick Caldwell. He revolutionized predictive AI. I saw an older white couple take the seats in Comfort Plus right after. Those had to be his original seats. By the time the plane began its initial descent into New York, a consensus had formed among many passengers. They had witnessed something wrong, something unjust, something that shouldn't happen in 2025. And many of them had documented it. If you've made it this far into the story, you're clearly someone who cares about justice. Someone who understands that these small moments of discrimination add up to systemic problems. But here's what I don't understand. Why haven't you subscribed yet? This channel exists to expose these exact situations, to shine light on the moments when masks slip and bias becomes visible, to create accountability through storytelling. If that matters to you, if you believe these stories need to be told, hit that subscribe button right now. Join our community of witnesses, because the next part of this story shows exactly why speaking up matters. The captain's voice crackled over the intercom as the plane began its descent into LaGuardia. Ladies and gentlemen, we've begun our initial descent into New York. Weather is clear, temperature is 48 degrees. Local time is 9:42 p.m. Flight attendants, prepare the cabin for arrival. His voice was confident, professional. The voice of a man who had no idea what was waiting for him on the ground. In row 31, Derrick Caldwell straightened his tie and checked his phone one last time before airplane mode. 2 new notifications. One from Brandon, stay seated. Do not leave yet. Another from his assistant, #Horizon Racism trending. Tim Z asking for comment. Derrick's eyes widened slightly. So fast? The situation had escalated beyond even his expectations. What Derrick didn't know, couldn't know from row 31, was just how viral the story had already gone. A passenger in row 17 had a significant TikTok following. Her video, posted during a bathroom break using the plane's Wi-Fi, had already hit 800,000 views. Famous black tech CEO Derrick Caldwell just got forced to the back of the plane on my flight while a white couple took his seat. Captain was nasty about it. At Horizon Airlines explain? A Twitter thread from the tech journalist had been picked up by several major tech blogs. Screenshots of Derrick squeezed into the middle seat were circulating with captions like, "This is how Horizon Airlines treats one of the most brilliant minds in tech." The hashtag Flying While Black was trending nationally. Horizon Airlines' social media team was in crisis mode, their mentions flooded with demands for explanation. And all of this had happened while Flight 2375 was still in the air. The landing gear deployed with a mechanical thunk. The plane descended through wispy clouds, the lights of New York City spreading out below like a circuit board. Wheels touched down on LaGuardia's runway with a squeal of rubber. The engines reversed thrust, pushing passengers forward against their seatbelts. Captain Doyle's voice came over the intercom one final time. "Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to LaGuardia Airport. Local time is 9:58 p.m. Please remain seated with your seatbelt fastened until we reach the gate and the seatbelt sign has been turned off." Standard announcement. Routine landing. Everything normal. Except it wasn't. As the plane taxied to the gate, Derrick Caldwell sat perfectly still in row 31. His expression revealed nothing of the text messages lighting up his phone. Nothing of the viral storm brewing outside the aircraft. He simply waited. Around him, the usual post-landing chaos erupted. Passengers standing too early. Overhead bins popping open. The rustle of coats being put on. The impatient shuffle toward the exits. But Derrick remained seated, following Brandon's instruction. "Stay seated. Do not leave yet." The plane docked at the gate. The seatbelt sign dinged off. Passengers began filing out. And then, a loud knock on the aircraft door. The flight attendants exchanged confused glances. This wasn't standard procedure. No one knocked on an aircraft door from the outside. The lead flight attendant opened the door cautiously. Standing in the jet bridge was a uniformed airline supervisor, flanked by two airport security officers. The supervisor's voice carried through the now quiet cabin. "Captain Doyle. Step forward, please." The cabin fell silent. That peculiar hush that descends when something unexpected disrupts the normal flow of events. "Captain Doyle. Step forward, please." The supervisor's voice, firm, authoritative, brooking no argument, carried through the now quiet cabin. Passengers who had been standing to retrieve their bags froze in place. Flight attendants exchanged alarmed glances. In the cockpit doorway, Captain Theodore Doyle appeared. His captain's hat tucked under his arm. His expression a mixture of confusion and irritation. "What's going on?" he asked, the confidence in his voice now tinged with uncertainty. The supervisor, a black woman in her late 40s with the name, Diana Mitchell, Regional Operations Director, embroidered on her blazer, didn't soften her tone. "We need to speak with you immediately regarding an incident that occurred during boarding in Dallas." Doyle's face flushed. "Whatever passenger complaint this is, it can wait until I've completed my post-flight checks." Diana Mitchell didn't blink. "This isn't a request, Captain. This is a directive from executive leadership." The remaining passengers had abandoned any pretense of disinterest. Phones were out. Videos recording. This unexpected confrontation was being documented from multiple angles. In row 31, Derrick Caldwell remained seated, watching the scene unfold with the calm detachment of someone who had anticipated exactly this moment. What you're witnessing right now is something extraordinarily rare. The real-time reversal of a power dynamic that has existed in commercial aviation since its inception. For decades, the captain's authority on an aircraft has been nearly absolute. Their word final. Their judgment unquestioned. But in this moment, on this aircraft, that authority is being publicly challenged. And not by another pilot or a federal air marshal, but because of how that authority was wielded against a black passenger. Captain Doyle's professional composure began to crack. His face reddened further. His voice rose slightly. "This is highly irregular. I have procedures to follow. Whatever this is about can be addressed through proper channels." Diana Mitchell remained unmoved. "Captain, I'm acting on direct orders from Brandon Ellison, Chief Operating Officer of Horizon Airlines. You can either walk with us now or security can escort you. Your choice." At the mention of Brandon Ellison, one of the highest-ranking executives in the company, Doyle's demeanor changed. The color drained from his face. His posture stiffened. He knew that name. Everyone at Horizon knew that name. "Fine," he said, voice tight. "Let me get my things." As this exchange unfolded, Diana Mitchell's eyes scanned the cabin until they found Derrick Caldwell, still seated calmly in row 31. Their eyes met briefly. She gave him a small, professional nod. Then she turned back to the remaining passengers. "Ladies and gentlemen, on behalf of Horizon Airlines, we deeply regret any disturbance. Those continuing to connecting flights will be met by customer service representatives at the gate to assist with any missed connections due to this delay." But her next words sent a ripple of whispers through the cabin. "Mr. Caldwell, would you please remain on board after other passengers have deplaned? We have arrangements for your comfort immediately." Have you ever witnessed that moment when someone who has been wronged finally receives acknowledgement? When the tables turn and justice begins to unfold right before your eyes. That electric feeling in the air, part vindication, part shock, is exactly what the passengers on Flight 2375 were experiencing. We're watching a rare moment when the invisible becomes visible. When discrimination that normally happens without consequence suddenly faces accountability. If you want to understand just how significant this moment is, and what happens next in this executive lounge, drop a justice in the comments right now. Let me know you're still with me for this incredible turning point. The deplaning process took on a surreal quality. Passengers moved slowly, many lingering to capture final footage or witness whatever might happen next. Flight attendants stood unnaturally straight, their customer service smiles replaced by tense expressions. Captain Doyle was escorted off the aircraft first, flanked by the security officers. His face was ashen now, his earlier confidence completely evaporated. As the last regular passengers filed out, Diana Mitchell approached row 31. "Mr. Caldwell," she said, her professional tone warmed by genuine respect. "I'm Diana Mitchell, Regional Operations Director. Mr. Ellison sent me personally. We have a private lounge prepared and a car waiting to take you to your hotel afterward." Derrick stood, finally able to stretch to his full height after hours cramped in the middle seat. "Thank you, Ms. Mitchell. I appreciate the response." She lowered her voice slightly. "Sir, I want you to know, this isn't just damage control." Brandon called an emergency executive meeting the moment he heard what happened. "What occurred today? It's being taken very seriously at the highest levels." Derrick nodded, gathering his carry-on. "Good. Because it should be." The scene that greeted Derrick as he exited the aircraft was unlike anything he had experienced in his frequent travels. A phalanx of Horizon Airlines representatives lined the jet bridge. Not gate agents but senior staff. Dark suits. Earpieces. The kind of reception usually reserved for dignitaries or celebrities. At the gate area, a small crowd had gathered. Passengers from the flight. Airport workers. People who had recognized Derrick from social media posts that were already circulating. Phones recorded his exit from the aircraft. Whispers followed him through the terminal. "That's him, the tech CEO they forced to the back. Did you see they just escorted the pilot off? Horizon is in full crisis mode. Their stock is already dropping in after-hours trading." Diana Mitchell led Derrick through the terminal with practiced efficiency, bypassing the normal routes, taking staff elevators and private corridors until they reached a door marked, "Executive Lounge, Authorized Personnel Only." The lounge was everything row 31 was not. Spacious, quiet, comfortable leather chairs. A spread of food and drinks that would put most first-class cabins to shame. But what caught Derrick's attention wasn't the luxury, it was the people waiting inside. Brandon Ellison, COO of Horizon Airlines. His Stanford classmate. His friend. Two corporate attorneys in expensive suits, legal pads already open. A woman Derrick recognized as Horizon's chief communications officer. And sitting alone in a corner, looking distinctly uncomfortable, Captain Theodore Doyle. "I want you to really absorb what's happening here." Less than 3 hours ago, Derrick Caldwell was being dismissed by Captain Doyle at a boarding gate. Told to take a middle seat in the back or not fly at all. Now, that same captain is sitting in an executive lounge, surrounded by C-suite executives, waiting for Derrick's arrival. This isn't just a reversal of fortune. This is a fundamental shift in who holds power in this situation. And it happened because Derrick had something most passengers don't: connections, influence, and the social capital to make his mistreatment matter to the airline. Brandon Ellison crossed the room immediately, embracing Derrick with genuine warmth. "Derrick, man, I'm so sorry this happened. The moment I got your text, I started making calls." Derrick returned the embrace briefly. "I appreciate that, Brandon. Truly." Brandon's expression darkened. "This shouldn't have happened to anyone. But the fact that it happened to you, one of our most valued customers, my friend, it's completely unacceptable." He gestured to the others in the room. "We've got the response team assembled. Legal is preparing options. PR is monitoring the situation. And," he lowered his voice slightly, "the CEO has called an emergency board meeting for tomorrow morning." Derrick nodded, taking this in. Then his eyes moved to Captain Doyle, still sitting alone in the corner. "And him?" Brandon's jaw tightened. "Suspended, effective immediately. Pending investigation. But between us? He's done at Horizon. 30 years of service or not." What neither man fully grasped yet was the magnitude of the public response already building outside that executive lounge. The hashtag Horizon Racism had exploded across platforms. Video clips from passengers were being picked up by major news outlets. Horizon stock had indeed dropped 3% in after-hours trading. Celebrity activists were sharing the story. Black business leaders were weighing in. Tech publications were running special reports on Silicon Valley's Derrick Caldwell and the ongoing reality of flying while black. The incident had touched a nerve, becoming not just about one man's experience, but a symbol of the everyday indignities faced by black travelers. Comments flooded social media. If they treat Derrick Caldwell, a literal billionaire, like this, imagine how they treat regular black folks. Captain needs to be fired. Full stop. Hashtag Horizon Racism. Waiting for the "it wasn't about race" excuses to start rolling in 3, 1. This is why I drive whenever possible. Been flying 30 plus years and still get randomly selected for additional screening every single time. What makes this story so powerful isn't that it's unique, it's that it's painfully common. The mystery isn't why this happened to Derrick Caldwell. The mystery is how many thousands of similar incidents happen every day without executive lounges, without viral hashtags, without accountability. Black passengers being moved from first class. Muslim travelers subjected to random additional screening. Latino families questioned about their documentation at gates. Asian passengers asked to change seats because another traveler feels uncomfortable. The daily, grinding reality of navigating travel spaces while being seen as other. The difference in Derrick's case wasn't the discrimination, it was the consequences. Brandon guided Derrick to the main seating area, where the attorneys and PR director waited with barely concealed anxiety. "Mr. Caldwell," began the senior attorney, "we want to express our deepest regrets for your experience today. We're prepared to offer." Derrick held up a hand, stopping him mid-sentence. "Before we discuss compensation or settlements, I want to speak with Captain Doyle." The room fell silent. The executives exchanged glances. Brandon cleared his throat. "Derrick, that's not necessary. We can handle this without." "It is necessary," Derrick said firmly. "For me. For him. For your airline." After a moment, Brandon nodded. "Of course." Captain Theodore Doyle sat alone, his uniform suddenly seeming too large for his frame. The gold stripes on his sleeves, symbols of authority and experience, now looked like targets. In his 30-year career, he had never been in a situation like this. Never been summoned to an executive lounge. Never faced suspension. Never had his judgment questioned so publicly. His mind raced with justifications. He was maintaining order. The flight was already delayed. The passenger was being difficult. He was backing up his gate agents. He was doing his job. But beneath those justifications lay a growing, uncomfortable realization. Would he have intervened the same way if Derrick Caldwell had been white? The moment we're about to witness is one of the most powerful in this entire story. It's the direct confrontation between a man who wielded his authority without thought and a man who has spent his entire life navigating the consequences of such thoughtlessness. If you've ever been on either side of this equation, if you've ever been dismissed because of who you are, or if you've ever realized you treated someone unfairly based on unconscious bias, this next segment will hit hard. Hit that subscribe button right now and turn on notifications. Because understanding these moments of reckoning is how we grow. It's how we do better. It's how we build a more just world. Derrick Caldwell crossed the lounge with measured steps, stopping directly in front of Captain Doyle. He didn't sit. Instead, he stood at his full height, looking down at the seated pilot. The power dynamic from the gate had been completely reversed. For a long moment, neither man spoke. The tension in the room was palpable. Finally, Doyle broke the silence, his voice hoarse. "Mr. Caldwell, I misjudged. Misread a situation I should never have interfered in. For that, I beg forgiveness." His eyes darted around the room, Brandon, the attorneys, the PR director scribbling notes. The weight of the world pressed on Doyle's shoulders. One headline tomorrow and his 3 decades of flying would end in disgrace. But what struck Derrick wasn't Doyle's apology. It was the imbalance. How easily systemic disrespect humiliated one man of color in a single decision. How fragile Doyle became once the tables turned, stripped of uniformed power. Derrick leaned forward, voice calm but razor-edged. "Forgiveness isn't just words, Captain. It's action. What will you do when the next black passenger walks onto your plane? When the next Latina businesswoman upgrades to first? Or the next Muslim family boards during Eid?" Doyle's silence said enough. This question, "What will you do next time?" is the heart of accountability. Not just apologizing for past actions but committing to different future ones. It's the difference between damage control and actual change. And in Captain Doyle's silence, we hear the uncomfortable truth. Many people are more afraid of being called racist than they are of actually doing the internal work to address their biases. Derrick continued, his voice level but intense. You didn't see me as a person today, Captain. You saw a category. A problem. Someone who didn't belong in Comfort Plus. Someone who should be grateful for whatever seat they're given. He paused, letting the words land. I want you to understand something. That seat wasn't just about legroom or a complimentary drink. It was about dignity. About the right to receive what I paid for without justification or explanation. Doyle's eyes remained fixed on the floor. I don't know what happens to your career after today. That's not my decision. But I do know this. Whatever consequences you face are the result of your actions, not my response to them. With that, Derrick turned away, addressing Brandon and the executives. Now we can discuss next steps. The next hour unfolded with the precision of a high-stakes corporate crisis response. The attorneys outlined options. The PR director presented messaging strategies. Brandon discussed policy changes already being drafted. Horizon Airlines was in full damage control mode. But Derrick wasn't interested in personal compensation or special treatment. I don't want a settlement, he said firmly. I want structural changes. He outlined his demands. Mandatory bias training for all customer-facing staff, with particular emphasis on gate agents and flight crews. A clear, public policy on seat reassignments that eliminated discretionary decisions that could be influenced by bias. A diverse passenger advisory board with actual power to review and address discrimination complaints. Transparent reporting of discrimination incidents and resolutions. Financial support for organizations working to address discrimination in travel and transportation. The executives exchanged glances. These weren't simple PR moves or quick fixes. These were fundamental changes to how the airline operated. Brandon was the first to nod. Consider it done. All of it. The atmosphere in the executive lounge shifted after Derrick laid out his demands. What had begun as a corporate crisis management session had transformed into something more profound. A negotiation about systemic change. Captain Doyle remained in his corner, now largely forgotten by the executives. His presence a reminder of how quickly authority can evaporate when confronted with its misuse. Brandon Ellison leaned forward, his expression serious. Derrick, I want you to know, this isn't just talk. The CEO has already authorized me to implement whatever changes necessary to address this properly. Derrick nodded, but his expression remained skeptical. I've heard corporate promises before, Brandon. I've sat through diversity initiatives that changed nothing. I've watched companies issue apologies while continuing the same practices. This is different, Brandon insisted. For one thing, it's personal to me. As one of the few black executives at this level in the airline industry, I've experienced my share of what you went through today. He gestured around the room. For another, this has gone beyond a customer complaint. The videos are everywhere. #Horizon Racism is trending nationally. Our stock is already taking a hit. The board is in panic mode. The PR director, a woman named Vanessa Chin, interjected with professional calm. Mr. Caldwell, from a communications perspective, we're facing a watershed moment. Your experience has resonated with thousands of travelers who've faced similar treatment. This isn't just about one incident anymore. What's happening in this room represents a crucial truth about institutional change. Sometimes it takes a perfect storm of factors to create real movement. Moral arguments alone rarely shift corporate behavior. Neither do isolated incidents or individual complaints. But when moral imperatives align with business interests, when public pressure meets internal advocacy, when the cost of not changing exceeds the cost of change, that's when systems begin to transform. Derrick considered this for a moment, then turned to the legal team. I want everything in writing. Not just promises or press releases. Binding commitments with timelines and benchmarks. The senior attorney, a sharp-eyed woman in her 50s, nodded. We can draft an agreement tonight. Have it ready for review by morning. Good, Derrick said. Then he turned back to Brandon. There's one more thing. Brandon raised an eyebrow. Name it. I want to finish this conversation with Captain Doyle. Alone. The request sent a ripple of unease through the room. The attorneys exchanged glances. The PR director tensed visibly. Brandon studied his friend's face. Are you sure that's wise? It's necessary, Derrick replied simply. After a moment, Brandon nodded. Everyone, let's give them the room. We'll continue this discussion afterward. Have you ever had that moment when you needed to speak truth directly to someone who wronged you? Not through lawyers or mediators or corporate channels, but face-to-face, human-to-human? That raw, necessary conversation that can't happen with an audience? That's the moment Derrick Caldwell is creating right now. Not for vengeance or humiliation, but for something more essential: understanding. We're about to witness the kind of conversation that rarely happens across the divides of race and power in America. And if you want to understand why this matters so deeply, drop a truth in the comments. Because what happens next changes everything. The executives filed out of the lounge, Brandon last among them. He paused at the door, looking back at his friend with concern. "We'll be right outside if you need anything." Derrick nodded, and the door closed with a soft click. And then it was just the two of them. Derrick Caldwell, tech visionary who had been forced to the back of the plane, and Captain Theodore Doyle, the man who had put him there. For a long moment, neither spoke. The silence stretched between them, heavy with all that had transpired in the past few hours. Derrick finally broke it, his voice quieter now without the audience of executives. "Do you know who I am, Captain Doyle?" Doyle swallowed hard. "Yes, sir. I've been briefed. You're Derrick Caldwell, the founder of Prism Analytics. A very important customer." Derrick shook his head slightly. "That's not what I'm asking. When you saw me at that gate in Dallas, did you know who I was then?" Doyle's eyes dropped. "No, sir. I did not." "And if you had known? If you'd recognized me as a tech CEO, as someone with influence and connections, would you have treated me differently?" The question hung in the air, uncomfortable in its directness. Doyle shifted in his seat. I'd like to think I treat all passengers with respect." "But you didn't treat me with respect," Derrick said, his voice still calm but firm. "You didn't see me as someone deserving of explanation or consideration. You saw me as a problem to be managed." Captain Doyle's face flushed. The defensive instinct, to justify, to explain away, visibly warred with the reality of his situation. "Mr. Caldwell, I was trying to keep the boarding process moving. The flight was already delayed. The gate agents had made their decision, and I was supporting my team." Derrick leaned forward. "Tell me this, did you ask why I was being moved? Did you inquire about what seat I had purchased or why it was being reassigned? Did you offer any alternative or compensation?" Doyle's silence was answer enough. "No," Derrick continued. "You simply assumed the black passenger was causing trouble. That I needed to be put in my place." "That's not fair," Doyle protested, his voice rising slightly. "This wasn't about race. It was about procedure. This moment, this exact response, is why these conversations are so difficult but so necessary. It wasn't about race. It was about procedure." How many times have we heard this defense? How many times have biased actions been justified by appeals to policy, to protocol, to procedure? But procedures don't enforce themselves. They're applied by people. And the discretion in how they're applied, who gets the benefit of the doubt, who gets flexibility, who gets courtesy, that's where bias lives and breathes. Derrick's expression didn't change, but his voice took on a new intensity. "Let me ask you something, Captain. In your 30 years of flying, how many times have you personally intervened in a seating issue at the gate?" Doyle hesitated. "I don't know. Many times." "And in those many times, how often was it to force a white passenger to move from a premium seat to economy?" The question landed like a physical blow. Doyle opened his mouth, then closed it again. "I can't recall specific." "That's not an answer," Derrick cut in. "Think carefully. How many times have you personally stepped in to tell a white passenger they needed to move to the back of the plane or not fly at all?" Doyle's silence stretched. Finally, he admitted, "I don't remember doing that specifically." Derrick nodded slowly. "That's what I thought." The conversation had reached its crucial point, the place where defensiveness either hardens into denial or cracks open to allow real reflection. "Captain Doyle, I'm not here to end your career or humiliate you. I'm here because what happened today matters beyond just you and me." Derrick's tone shifted, becoming more measured. "There are two paths forward from moments like this. One is denial, insisting there was no bias, that you would have treated anyone the same way, that this is all a misunderstanding or an overreaction." He paused, letting that sink in. "The other path is harder but more honest, recognizing that we all carry biases, that they affect our decisions in ways we don't always see. That intent doesn't erase impact." Doyle looked up, meeting Derrick's eyes for the first time since their confrontation began. "What do you want from me, Mr. Caldwell?" It was a genuine question, not defensive, not hostile, but uncertain. A man who had spent decades in positions of unquestioned authority now finding himself accountable in ways he'd never anticipated. When was the last time you had to truly reckon with the impact of your actions? Not just apologize but really understand how you affected someone else? That uncomfortable space between intention and impact, between what we meant to do and what we actually did, that's where growth happens. We're witnessing a rare moment of potential transformation. Not just corporate policy changes or public relations statements, but the harder, more personal work of one human being confronting their own biases. If you've ever been on either side of this equation, if you've ever had to hold someone accountable or been held accountable yourself, comment growth below. Because these difficult conversations are how we move forward. What I want, Derrick said carefully, is for you to understand that this isn't about you being a bad person or me being an angry black man. This is about systems and patterns that hurt real people every day. He leaned back slightly, his posture relaxing a fraction. I want you to imagine what it feels like to constantly calculate, will speaking up get me labeled as difficult? Will asking for what I paid for be seen as entitlement? Will standing my ground end with security being called? Doyle's expression shifted, a flicker of genuine consideration crossing his features. I want you to understand that for me, and for millions of others, these aren't theoretical questions. They're daily calculations. Constant energy expenditure. The tax we pay just to move through the world. Derrick paused, then continued more softly. And yes, I want you to feel the weight of this moment. Not so you collapse under it, but so you remember it. So the next time you're about to make a snap judgment about who belongs where, you hesitate. You question your assumptions. You do better. Something changed in Captain Doyle's face, a subtle shift from defensive posturing to genuine discomfort. Not the discomfort of being caught or punished, but the deeper discomfort of seeing yourself clearly for the first time. I've never. He began then stopped. Started again. In 30 years of flying, no one has ever called me out like this. That's part of the problem, Derrick replied. Consequences shouldn't depend on whether the person you mistreat has my resources or connections. Doyle nodded slowly. I understand that now. He took a deep breath. Mr. Caldwell, I am truly sorry. Not just for what happened today, but for not seeing it until now. It wasn't a perfect apology. It wasn't a complete transformation. But it was something real, a crack in the armor of defensiveness, a moment of genuine reflection. How many of these moments of reckoning never happen because the person harmed doesn't have Derrick's platform? How many daily indignities go unaddressed because the power imbalance is too great? And what would our world look like if more people in positions of authority had to directly face the impact of their biased actions? The door opened and Brandon Ellison stepped back into the room. His expression was a question mark, eyes moving between Derrick and Captain Doyle. Everything okay in here? Derrick stood, straightening his suit jacket. We've said what needed to be said. He turned to Doyle. Captain, I believe Mr. Ellison and his team have more to discuss with you regarding next steps. Doyle rose as well, his posture different now, less defensive, more subdued. Yes, sir. He hesitated, then extended his hand. Thank you for this conversation. Derrick looked at the offered hand for a moment, then accepted it with a firm grip. Not forgiveness exactly, but acknowledgement. Recognition of something important that had transpired between them. As Derrick moved toward the door, Brandon fell into step beside him. The car is ready to take you to your hotel. And Derrick, the CEO wants to meet with you tomorrow. He's talking about more than just addressing this incident. He's mentioning partnership opportunities, equity stakes, advisory positions. Derrick raised an eyebrow. Damage control. Brandon shook his head. Opportunity. For both sides. This could be the catalyst for real change at Horizon. And a platform for the work you've always wanted to do around diversity in tech and transportation. If you've made it this far in the story, you understand something crucial. Real change rarely happens in grand gestures or single moments. It happens in these complex intersections of personal accountability, public pressure, and institutional response. Have you ever witnessed a moment when individual injustice created the possibility for systemic change? Have you ever seen how quickly institutions respond when their bottom line is threatened? If these questions resonate with you, if you believe in the power of these stories to create accountability, hit that subscribe button right now. Join our community of witnesses. Because the next part of this story shows how personal confrontation becomes public transformation. The Four Seasons Hotel suite overlooked Central Park, the city lights twinkling against the pre-dawn sky. Derrick Caldwell stood at the window, phone pressed to his ear, watching the city slowly wake up. It was 5:17 a.m., just 7 hours after the confrontation in the executive lounge, but the world had already shifted dramatically. "Yes, I understand the board's position," Derrick said into the phone, his voice calm but firm. "But my conditions remain the same. This isn't about compensation or special treatment. This is about structural change." On the other end of the line was Harold Winters, CEO of Horizon Airlines. Not an assistant or a PR representative, but the chief executive himself, calling before sunrise. That's what a viral racism scandal and a 7% pre-market stock drop will do to a corporate priority list. Overnight, the incident had exploded beyond anyone's expectations. Major news networks had picked up the story. Morning shows were leading with it. Tech publications were running special features on Silicon Valley's Black Pioneer and the airline industry's racism problem. The hashtag Horizon Racism had generated over 2 million impressions. Black celebrities and business leaders were sharing their own travel discrimination stories. Calls for boycotts were spreading. And at the center of it all, the videos. Dozens of passengers had recorded different aspects of the incident, from the original gate confrontation to Captain Doyle being escorted off the plane. The footage was undeniable, unambiguous, impossible to explain away. Horizon Airlines was facing not just a PR crisis, but an existential one. What we're witnessing is the rare moment when individual injustice breaks through the noise and forces institutional response. When a story captures something so familiar to so many that it cannot be dismissed as an isolated incident. This isn't just about one black passenger and one white pilot. This is about the accumulated weight of thousands of similar experiences that usually go undocumented, unaddressed, and unchanged. Derrick ended the call and set his phone down on the desk, where his laptop displayed dozens of unread emails, text messages, and social media notifications. His assistant had been filtering the most urgent ones, but the volume was overwhelming. Interview requests from every major network. Speaking invitations from universities and conferences. Messages of support from other black executives and tech leaders. And most significantly, an official statement from Horizon Airlines announcing immediate policy changes and the formation of a passenger equity advisory board, with Derrick Caldwell invited to serve as its inaugural chairperson. A knock at the door interrupted his thoughts. His assistant, Maya, entered with a tablet in hand. "The Horizon press conference is about to start," she said. "And your first meeting at Nexus has been pushed to noon to accommodate the CEO meeting at 9 a.m. Derrick nodded, turning his attention to the tablet as Maya pulled up the live stream. Harold Winters, CEO of Horizon Airlines, stood at a podium emblazoned with the company logo. His expression was grave, his usual corporate confidence replaced by a sober humility. "Good morning. I'm here today to address an incident that occurred on Horizon Airlines Flight 2375 yesterday evening, an incident that falls far short of our values and commitments as an organization." He took a deep breath before continuing. "A valued customer, Mr. Derrick Caldwell, was removed from his premium seat without explanation or compensation, and was treated with disrespect by both our gate staff and one of our pilots. Video of this incident has circulated widely, and many have rightly pointed out the racial dynamics at play." The CEO paused, his next words carefully measured. "Let me be absolutely clear. What happened to Mr. Caldwell was wrong. It was discriminatory. And it reflects systemic issues that Horizon Airlines must address immediately and comprehensively." How often do you hear a major corporation admit to discrimination without qualification? Without the usual corporate doublespeak of regrettable incidents, or misunderstandings, or we take all allegations seriously? That admission alone signals something extraordinary happening. A recognition that sometimes, the evidence is so clear that denial becomes more damaging than acknowledgement. We're witnessing a moment when public accountability forces institutional honesty. When the cost of evasion exceeds the cost of truth. And if you want to understand why this matters beyond one airline or one incident, stay with me. Because the implications of this moment reach far beyond Flight 2375. The CEO continued, outlining a series of immediate actions. Effective immediately, Captain Theodore Doyle has been terminated from Horizon Airlines. While we recognize his 30 years of service, his actions in this incident reflect a fundamental failure of judgment that cannot be reconciled with our values or expectations. He moved on to broader changes. Additionally, we are implementing the following changes, effective immediately. First, a complete overhaul of our seat reassignment policies to eliminate discretionary decisions that could be influenced by bias. Second, mandatory anti-bias training for all customer-facing staff, with particular emphasis on gate agents and flight crews. Third, the formation of a passenger equity advisory board with actual authority to review discrimination complaints and recommend policy changes. Fourth, transparent quarterly reporting of discrimination incidents and resolutions. And fifth, a $10 million commitment to organizations working to address discrimination in travel and transportation. The CEO looked directly into the cameras. These actions are just the beginning. We have extended an invitation to Mr. Caldwell to serve as the inaugural chairperson of our Passenger Equity Advisory Board, and we are committed to making Horizon Airlines a leader in equitable treatment for all passengers. Derrick watched the press conference with a measured expression. Not satisfaction exactly, but recognition. Recognition that his personal humiliation was being transformed into something more significant. A catalyst for change that might benefit thousands of travelers who looked like him. Maya glanced at him. They're giving you everything you asked for. They're saying they'll give me everything I asked for, Derrick corrected. Implementation is where most diversity initiatives fail. That's why I insisted on the advisory board having actual authority and the quarterly reporting being public. He turned away from the screen. But yes, it's a start. Throughout the morning, the story continued to evolve. Business analysts discussed the financial impact on Horizon. Stock down 7%, booking cancellations spiking, competitor airlines seeing increased traffic. Tech publications highlighted Derrick's history of breaking barriers in Silicon Valley and his new role as an advocate for equity in travel. Black travel groups shared resources and guides for documenting and reporting discrimination incidents. And perhaps most significantly, other passengers began coming forward with their own stories of discriminatory treatment on Horizon and other airlines, many with their own video evidence. What had begun as one incident was rapidly becoming a movement. This cascade effect, when one story breaks through and creates space for others to be heard, is how lasting change often begins. For years, Black travelers have shared their experiences of discrimination. They've written articles, posted on social media, filed complaints. But without video evidence, without a high-profile victim, without the viral amplification of multiple witnesses, these stories were too easily dismissed. It was a misunderstanding. There were legitimate reasons for the decision. We treat all passengers the same. But now the pattern is visible, undeniable. And that visibility creates the possibility for accountability beyond this single incident. In a glass-walled conference room on the 37th floor of Horizon's corporate headquarters, Derrick Caldwell sat across from Harold Winters, CEO, and a team of executives including Brandon Ellison. The mood was serious but constructive. Legal documents spread across the table, not settlement agreements or NDAs, but binding commitments to the changes announced at the press conference. Mr. Caldwell, the CEO began, beyond the advisory board role, we'd like to discuss a more substantial partnership with you and Nexus Intelligence. Derrick raised an eyebrow. I'm listening. Your expertise in AI and predictive analytics could help us identify patterns of bias in our operations before they result in incidents like yesterday's. We're prepared to offer an equity partnership and a substantial contract for Nexus to develop these tools for Horizon. It was a smart move, addressing the discrimination issue while simultaneously creating a business opportunity, turning crisis into potential innovation. Brandon slid a folder across the table. The initial terms. We're talking 8 figures with potential expansion across the industry if the pilot program succeeds. Derrick didn't open the folder immediately. And the advisory board? The policy changes? Those remain non-negotiable regardless of any business arrangement. The CEO nodded firmly. Absolutely. Those commitments stand independently. This would be a separate partnership building on the foundation of those changes. Derrick considered the offer carefully. On one level, it was exactly the kind of opportunity Nexus needed. A major client, significant funding, the chance to create technology with real-world impact on equity issues. On another level, it raised complex questions about the monetization of discrimination. About the fine line between accountability and opportunity. About his own role in this unfolding narrative. What would you do in Derrick's position? Would you accept the partnership, seeing it as a chance to create systemic change from within while growing your company? Decline the partnership, focusing solely on the advisory role to maintain independence and avoid any appearance of being bought off? Propose an alternative arrangement that balances these concerns? There are no simple answers here, just the complex reality of trying to create change within systems that have their own imperatives and interests. After a thoughtful pause, Derrick opened the folder and scanned the terms. I'll need to discuss this with my team, he said finally. But I'm open to exploring it under certain conditions. He outlined his thinking. First, any technology we develop must be transparent and explainable. No black box algorithms that hide how decisions are made. Second, the data and insights must be shared with the Passenger Equity Advisory Board, not just executives. Third, Nexus maintains intellectual property rights and the ability to deploy similar solutions across the industry. This can't be exclusive to Horizon. And fourth, a percentage of any revenue from these tools goes directly to scholarships for black students in aviation, technology, and transportation fields. The executives exchanged glances. These weren't standard terms for a corporate technology contract. But these weren't standard circumstances. The CEO nodded. We can work with those conditions. Have your legal team review the proposal, and we'll refine it based on your feedback. As the meeting concluded and hands were shaken, Derrick felt the weight of the moment. What had begun with humiliation in Row 31 had transformed into something with potential for far-reaching impact. But as he left the Horizon headquarters, a deeper question lingered in his mind. What about all the passengers who didn't have his platform? His connections? His ability to command a CEO's attention? What about the thousands of similar incidents that happen every day without viral videos or press conferences or policy changes? If this story has resonated with you, if you've experienced discrimination while traveling or witnessed it happening to others, I want to hear from you. Share your story in the comments. What happened? How did you respond? Did you receive any resolution? By collecting these experiences, by making them visible, we create the evidence needed for broader accountability. We transform individual incidents into recognizable patterns that demand response. Your story matters. Your witness matters. Your voice matters. Night had fallen over New York City. The meetings were done. The press conferences concluded. The social media storm continued to rage, but Derrick Caldwell had disconnected, at least for a few hours. He stood at the window of his hotel suite, the city lights reflecting in the glass. In his hand, a glass of bourbon. On the desk behind him, his phone continued to light up with notifications, but he'd silenced it. This moment of quiet was necessary. A chance to process everything that had happened in the 24 hours since he'd been forced to Row 31. In the span of a single day, he had gone from humiliated passenger to the face of a movement. From victim to advocate. From the back of the plane to the boardroom. The transformation was dizzying. Validating, yes. But also exhausting in a way that felt familiar. The particular exhaustion that comes from having your personal pain become public property. From having your individual experience elevated to symbol status. Derrick took a sip of bourbon, letting the warmth spread through his chest. The outcomes were undeniably positive. A discriminatory pilot held accountable. An airline implementing actual policy changes. A potential partnership that could create tools to identify and prevent bias. A platform to advocate for broader change in the industry. But beneath these victories lay a more complicated truth, one that Derrick had been turning over in his mind since leaving Horizon's headquarters. None of this would have happened if he hadn't been Derrick Caldwell. This is the reality we need to confront directly. Justice shouldn't depend on your net worth. Accountability shouldn't require viral videos. Corporate response shouldn't hinge on stock prices. Dignity shouldn't be a privilege reserved for those with power. What happened to Derrick Caldwell on Flight 2375 happens to countless travelers every day, without executive lounges, without CEO apologies, without policy changes, without multimillion-dollar partnerships. The system worked for Derrick not because the system works, but because he had the leverage to force it to work. And that fundamental inequality is what we need to address next. Derrick set down his glass and turned from the window. He crossed to the desk where his laptop sat open, displaying the draft of a LinkedIn post he'd been working on. Not a victory lap. Not a celebration of Horizon's response. But a deeper reflection on what this incident revealed about power, accountability, and the work still to be done. He began to type. Yesterday I was forced to sit in Row 31 middle seat, despite having paid for a premium ticket. Today I'm being offered partnerships, advisory roles, and public apologies. The contrast is stark. And revealing. What changed wasn't the facts of what happened to me. What changed was that those facts became publicly visible, economically threatening, and impossible to dismiss. I'm grateful for the swift response from Horizon Airlines. The policy changes announced today represent real progress. The advisory board creates a mechanism for ongoing accountability. These are meaningful steps forward. But I keep thinking about everyone who sits in Row 31 without the platform to demand change. Without the connections to reach a COO directly. Without the social capital to make their mistreatment matter to corporate bottom lines. True equity isn't just about how companies treat people with power. It's about how they treat people without it. So while I'll work with Horizon to implement these changes, I'm also launching a broader initiative, the Row 31 Project. This digital platform will allow travelers to document and report discrimination incidents across all airlines and travel providers. It will use the same AI technology we're developing at Nexus to identify patterns and pressure companies for systemic change. Because this isn't about one seat on one plane. This is about who is seen as belonging in certain spaces, who is given the benefit of the doubt, who is accommodated and who is inconvenienced. This is about the 1,000 little decisions made every day that reinforce who matters and who doesn't. And changing those decisions requires more than one viral incident. It requires sustained visibility, accountability, and pressure. The work continues. Join me. In the days and weeks that followed, the Row 31 project took shape. Developers from Nexus built the platform. Black travel influencers promoted it. Civil rights organizations partnered with it. Reports began flowing in, hundreds then thousands of them. Each one a data point. Each one a story. Each one evidence of patterns too consistent to be coincidence. Other airlines, seeing Horizon's crisis, began proactively reviewing their own policies. Travel industry publications ran special issues on bias in customer service. Congressional hearings were scheduled on discrimination in commercial aviation. The conversation had shifted from isolated incidents to systemic patterns, from individual bias to institutional responsibility. And it had started with one man being moved to the back of a plane. 3 months after Flight 2375, Derrick Caldwell boarded another Horizon Airlines flight. This time he was in seat 3A, exactly where his ticket said he should be. The gate agent smiled warmly. The flight attendant welcomed him by name. The captain, a black woman, stopped briefly to thank him for his work with the advisory board. As the plane taxied for takeoff, Derrick looked out the window at the Dallas-Fort Worth tarmac. So much had changed since that November evening. Policy changes implemented. Training programs launched. Reporting systems established. The Row 31 project growing daily. But as he fastened his seatbelt, Derrick knew the truth. This wasn't over. Not for him. Not for anyone who looked like him. Because systems don't transform overnight. Biases don't disappear with training videos. Cultures don't shift with press releases. Real change is slow, methodical, requires constant vigilance and pressure. And that's exactly what he was committed to providing. Let me ask you something that might feel uncomfortable. The next time you witness discrimination, whether on a plane, in a store, at work, anywhere, what will you do? Will you look away telling yourself it's not your problem? Will you feel bad but stay silent, worried about getting involved? Or will you become a witness? Will you document what you see? Will you speak up when it's safe to do so? Will you support those directly affected? Because here's the hard truth. Systems of discrimination don't just need perpetrators to function. They need bystanders. They need silence. They need the comfort of those who benefit to outweigh their concern for those who don't. Every time we witness injustice and do nothing, we become part of the problem. Every time we prioritize our comfort over someone else's dignity, we reinforce the very systems we claim to oppose. And every time we tell ourselves, it's not that bad, or maybe there's another explanation, when we know what we're seeing, we become complicit. This isn't just Derrick Caldwell's fight. This isn't just about one flight or one airline or one industry. This is about the world we choose to build together. The standards we set. The accountability we demand. The dignity we insist upon for every person, regardless of their power or platform. We can be witnesses. We can be documenters. We can be the evidence that makes denial impossible. We can be the collective force that transforms individual incidents into systemic change. We can ensure that what happened on Flight 2375 becomes not just another viral moment, but a turning point in how we address discrimination in public spaces. The question isn't whether discrimination will happen again. It will. The question is whether next time we'll be ready. Whether we'll stand together. Whether we'll demand the kind of accountability that Derrick Caldwell had to force through his platform and privilege. Because ultimately, this story isn't about seats on a plane. It's about who we choose to be when we see injustice. It's about whether we accept the world as it is, or insist on what it could be. It's about whether we're willing to move from row 31 to the front of the plane, not just as individuals but as a society. If this story moved you, if it made you think differently about power, about accountability, about your own role in creating change, then don't just like this video. Subscribe to this channel. Turn on notifications. Join our community of witnesses. Share this story with someone who needs to hear it. And most importantly, commit to being the kind of person who speaks up, who documents, who stands with those facing discrimination, even when it's uncomfortable, even when it's inconvenient, even when it would be easier to look away. Because that's how change happens. One witness at a time. One voice at a time. One stand at a time. Until row 31 becomes just another seat on the plane, and everyone's dignity is given the same value, regardless of their power or position. The work continues. Join us.